I'm Kelsey Litchfield, and this is the Field Advisor Podcast, where I talk with local experts to unpack the latest agronomy information and research, giving you the knowledge to make informed decisions out in the field. Welcome back to the Field Advisor Podcast. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, joined with ISA Outreach Agronomist Stephanie Porter and Matt Reardon, Senior Atmospheric Scientist at Nutrien Ag Solutions. I believe I got that right, Matt?
I think you did, yep. It's a long one.
So, Matt, my first question for you on this weather update, we're recording in early September. Are we in for a dry harvest season like last fall?
Yeah, it's certainly trending that way. A lot of those kind of seasonal to sub-seasonal signals that we track are pointing toward that drier fall, which is going to sound like a broken record to people who've been following the fall forecast in the Midwest over the last, since we got into this decade. So expecting these dry conditions that we kind of tripped into at the end of July. I mean, our last significant rainfall, like south of I-80, you have to go back to like the last, I think like July 31st. We had some stronger storms in August in northern Illinois. So like up in those northern counties, Chicago metro area, even over into northwest Indiana, saw plenty of storms, but you go further south and those rainfall values have just been cratering. And unfortunately, that like long-term trend doesn't look like we're going to see major changes going over the next month or so. So yeah, short answer, yes. I think this harvest season is shaping up to be another drier one.
So when you look at social media, there's always this graphic that says you are here and it points to false fall. Are we going to see hot temps return? I did look at the forecast here in West Central Illinois, and I think there's a hint of lower 80s next week, but nothing out of sorts, I believe.
Yeah, I love those like Midwest, you never know when like the actual fall's coming, and then there's like a similar phenomenon in spring, right? The like fall spring, and then of course we get another shot of winter in like early March or something like that. So we'll inevitably reach back into the 80s at some point in September. You can't even rule it out, in October as well. But it definitely seems like this sort of cooler stretch is more persistent. It's certainly not a 2 or 3 day stretch of cooler fall like temperatures. It's been like something of a 10 to 14 day stretch at this point. And we're warmish today. We're up into the 80s again, but it's all coming back down tonight. That cold front that Kelsey were talking earlier today, just about the rainfall that's finally starting to move through Illinois. That's attached to this cold front, which is going to bring those temperatures all the way back down into the 60s for high temperatures, maybe low 70s, and then those overnight lows, Thursday morning, Friday morning into the weekend. We're talking number with a 4 in front of it, 40s, maybe like mid 40s. So yeah, that autumn weather, it's coming back this weekend.
So I figured the warm weather is going to come next week whenever Darby and I do our one last field check for our on-farm trial system. So
sounds like it. But with those low temperatures, Matt, the F word, as in frost, are we seeing any chance of early frost risk? And I heard on the radio the other day that parts of Minnesota might be looking at it, but nothing here in Illinois.
Yeah, the only counties that we're really concerned about now are North Woods, northern Minnesota, way up there might crack, that 32 degree Fahrenheit line. Nothing imminent for Illinois. It would be hard pressed to get one here in late August and then into early September when we've had this cool stretch. We've gotten close in years prior, but not in any sort of recent years. So I think this current cold shot, if you will, we're going to avoid any sort of early frost consideration. But I will say if we stay dry, we do know that recent rainfall, even just having moisture in the soil from a recent rainfall, puts kind of a floor on those overnight temperatures. In fact, I was talking with some meteorologist colleagues of mine about that northern Minnesota frost chance that we're looking at. And we're all remarking that, well, they've had rainfall recently, and that might raise that floor above that 32 degree Fahrenheit line. So if we stay dry and we add another cold shot in late September, I'm probably singing a different tune that's going to lower those overnight temperatures just a little bit, and that might put us into frost territory if we stay dry and then we fall back into another cold pattern later in the month.
I know, Stephanie, parts of your area are just begging for rain. There's many areas, southern Illinois, who it just seems so crazy. A couple months ago, they couldn't get the rain to shut off, and now they're just dry all of a sudden.
Yeah, I know it's been brought up with some of my crop consultant friends that, they're going to hold off on soil testing as well. So that's something that's come up, and we'll hopefully have a blog about that on Field Advisor soon. I mean, because that obviously can affect some of the nutrients and results that you get. So that those concerns are coming up, and yeah, just overall, depending on soil type, of course, but the corn that I'm looking at out the window, I mean, it's pretty much it's dead, it's dying. So obviously, I think I brought up the cooler temperatures. I think are helping a little bit. It's at least not 190 degrees out, and the corn was starting to turn really fast then, and kind of just give up the ghost, as we say. But I think that some of the crops out there are definitely in trouble without getting this much needed rain for grain fill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenon we've seen all across August. I mentioned this earlier, just in that southern 2/3 of the state, we've been dry. The month of August, I mean, most kind of climate divisions, even counties, observed their top 3 driest August on record. In the southern kind of 2/3 half of the state, and we have records going back, 130 years. So it was dry historically in August, and we're seeing those precipitation deficits climb even year to date. I know just here in Central Illinois, we're looking at anywhere between 7 to 10 inches below how much rainfall we've usually accrued at this point in the year. And in July, when we had timely rainfalls, that seemed to come along every week. It wasn't maybe as much as we could have gotten out of the system. It was good for the crop, and we were staring down, I think, a pretty decent crop locally. July 15th, I was feeling pretty good about where we were at. You switch a month later, we're 2 weeks without, above half-inch rainfall event, and you're losing yield. I mean, you have to be. We know that in the studies, the sensitivity to crops, certainly soybeans, right? In the month of August, that can be a huge month, a huge lever that can push in either direction. And then I think we saw that, unfortunately, with the lack of rainfall.
So in terms of lack of rainfall, is there hopes for a hurricane to spin up? I know in your latest blog post, Matt, you talked about hurricane season, and haven't seen it a lot in the news. I know Hurricane Aaron was a big headline, but it's been quiet as of late.
Yeah, so Aaron was coincidentally our first hurricane of the season. It was our 4th named storm, so reach tropical storm strength or higher, we get a name from the National Hurricane Center. If you reach hurricane status, that's its own thing we have to keep an eye on. But Aaron went all the way up to Cat 5, right, sort of shortly after being named. It was one of these rapid intensifications, so to speak. And fortunately, it did stay just east of the continental U.S., but it brought rip current impacts to the Carolinas, up and down the east coast. Frankly, we saw a ton of water rescues as a result and some coastal erosion due to that. So it's not like it didn't impact things. But like you said, since then, it's been quiet. That was an expectation as we went into the end of August and now early September here, that there would be this predictable lull in the Atlantic in that hurricane activity. We track this kind of cycle through the equator. We call it the MJO, or the Madden-Julian oscillation. And all it does is it tends to promote ascent. So thunderstorms, these kind of incipient tropical thunderstorms, which can then build and bubble into a hurricane, those tend to be suppressed in the current phases of the MJO, where it is now over in the eastern hemisphere. That is likely going to move back over the Atlantic in the middle to latter part of September, and that's where we're expecting maybe a predictable uptick in that Atlantic hurricane activity. Now, that isn't to say, 3 hurricanes are going to form and then train right up here into the Midwest, but it probably means we're going to have a few more areas to watch and keep an eye on as we go through the end of the month. We are keeping an eye on one area right now. We do have one of these African easterly waves, these tropical storms that kind of come off of Africa and can maybe build into a hurricane thereafter. We're keeping an eye on that in the central Atlantic, but we're talking like a week plus, maybe even 2 weeks out from being a threat to the continental U.S. And frankly, a lot of the models right now are keeping it out to sea, much like Aaron did. So that's the hope, at least over the next kind of 10 to 15 days, is no hurricanes to talk about, certainly not locally.
Any storms locally? I know it's kind of become quiet on that front too. I mean, we could use a nice rainfall, but in terms of storms, has that season passed through?
Yeah, we predictably see that lull and those lightning chances, severe thunderstorms around this time of the year. So certainly getting through the end of August and now into September. The showers that are coming through on this cold front, we have them moving through northern Illinois right about now this morning here on Wednesday. Those will quickly be tracking through the rest of the state as we go through the afternoon, going from north to south, so through central Illinois this evening, kind of around dinner time. The problem with those is we might get a rumble of thunder out of them, but they aren't healthy in terms of those rainfall amounts, where they're kind of sparse. There's some question of how well they'll stick together as they move north to south. We're even seeing that now. If you look at some of the radar returns, it's not like this big blob of heavy rainfall where everyone's getting an inch. It could be anywhere from 1/10 of an inch to the lucky ones may get a half an inch. And when you think about the deficits we just talked about, not getting much rain since the beginning of August, this isn't going to be this bringing everybody back up to normal rainfall. And Stephanie, like you said, even if we got like an inch of rainfall right now, I mean, the crops out my window is pretty well baked. I mean, how much are we really moving the needle at this point? Maybe for beans, but I do wonder about corn.
Stephanie, you have any comment on that?
Yeah,
rainfall?
I mean, there's the only chance we do have. We have to remember a lot of the crops in some of the areas were planted at different planting dates.
Sure.
So, like I said, there could be still some chance for some of the later planted stuff. But definitely here in central Illinois, some of the April planted stuff is definitely turning now. Soybeans depending on the maturity, but around 3.6 is starting to change. So we're getting to the time where there's just not much more time left for again, like you said, Matt, for rain to help give us some grain fill.
Yeah, we checked our corn plot. That's literally right out the window here. It was planted, I want to say May 9th. We cut that up and broke some kernels yesterday, and we're predicting about a week out from black layer. So maybe, still like a last chance to get some grain fill in, but it's shutting down quickly, I think, for much of the state.
Let's go back to soil moisture. Stephanie, you mentioned crop consultants holding back off on soil sampling. What are they looking for so they can resume those activities? Just more rain? How much rain?
Yeah. I think they've commented not just a heavy rain. I mean, they're going to need quite a bit to go before they go back in substantially to get down 6-9 inches to take a soil sample. Again, I think some of them have learned from the past and, resampled later and learned that there was obviously some results were off, especially with potassium. So, again, yeah, they're going to need quite a bit of rainfall before they'll start and go and then they'll have to dry up again, but before they can soil sample again. And actually, it's too hard to soil sample if you ever try to get a probe in the ground right now, to be completely honest. And they have some hydraulic type, systems too that I don't think that this ground would be very good for those types of their machinery that they have either. So.
Ooh, that'd be rough. Matt, on your latest blog, you talked about what to watch for in the next 2 to 4 weeks, and you said the line between adequate and running on fumes has been sharp this year in terms of soil moisture gradients. You said county level maps hide a lot of field scale variability. Plan harvest order with that in mind. Expand on that a bit.
Yeah, we were talking about this just earlier. The drought monitor that came out last Thursday has this kind of very localized drought consideration right over kind of Champaign County over toward Piatt, a little bit southwest there, near there, maybe like Shelby area. And that changes quickly. I mean, it's you go a few counties northwest toward Bloomington, and those year-to-date precipitation deficits look very different, and that's a 40-minute drive. So I think it depends exactly where you're at. That is the case every year, unless we have one of these kind of mega droughts like 2012, where just everybody's lacking for moisture. But the issues this year have been localized. Earlier this year, like you said, it was southern Illinois. The production counties down there are seeing too much rain. They've obviously shifted drier here in the last month. But a lot of this kind of drought concern that we're talking about here, Stephanie and Kelsey, up in northern Illinois, they had flooding. There was a disaster proclamation declared up in the Chicago metro area because of so much flooding up there. So it's been very variable, for lack of a better word, across the state. So some of the concerns we're talking about here aren't going to be as founded for folks, north of I-80 and some of these other localized areas.
Well, I think your last podcast that you did with Matt, I think, when we were talking about July, I think he did a really good job. I mean, we were just having a lot of those, what we call, I know this isn't technical, pop-up storms. And I mean, it could be raining on one field and not the next. And I think that's been the key that I keep hearing from farmers, especially at Farm Progress Show, that it's just the rain's been so variable. And if they did get some, they said, well, it was only, I only got a 1/10 or 2. If they were lucky enough to get any rain in August.
So real quick, Matt, talk about September again. So we're expecting the whole month dry, lower temperatures. What about towards the end of September? I know we've talked about early September, but what it's looking like at the month end.
Yeah, so there's the kind of broad influences we're keeping an eye on. One is the warmth in the North Pacific ocean temperatures. They've been very warm this year. Japan, the island had its hottest recorded temperature ever in the history of
Hmm.
records there. I think it was 107 degrees Fahrenheit. And part of that is just how warm the North Pacific has been. We have found historically when this area that is very warm in the Pacific right now tends to hold true through September and October, we tend to have drier falls locally. So that's where some of that seasonal consideration for that dry fall is coming from. And then it is also lining up, and this is critical, it's frustratingly simple, with a meteorological term we call persistence. And I say it's frustrating and simple for a reason. What tends to be the weather in the forecast or the future tends to remind us a little bit of where we're at now. So if we're kind of cool and dry now, there is always this kind of persistence that we may just be falling back into cool and dry later, which is why it wouldn't surprise me if this cool and dry sticks around for a while. I will say this, if you look out into the middle part of the month, maybe I'm looking right now like September 12th, 13th, and 14th, we're starting to see those winds try to back around out of the south. That puts those trajectories of the air mass more over the Gulf, more of the Atlantic, and that would predictably bring some warmer air back into the region, maybe some more moisture perhaps yielding fuel for some more thunderstorms. We're talking, mid-September storms, not like big severe weather outbreaks, but perhaps something to talk about in terms of precipitation chances day to day rather than the last 20 days, which has been like it is today, sunny and dry, save for this kind of weak cold front that's coming through. So look out for the middle of the month for another chance of warmer temperatures, but again, we're talking like September warms, so 80s and some precipitation chances. Latter part of the month, the signal is we might, because of that seasonal influence, fall back into something of a drier stretch. That's what a lot of these long-range models are saying. Those long-range models, though, I mean, let's put a disclaimer on those. They did not perform well this summer. I mean, performance was putrid, frankly. So they had a lot of our areas staying wet through August. That didn't happen. They had July turning drier, which we were wet in a lot of areas, right? Stephanie talking about those pop-up thunderstorms, especially in the northern part of the state. So they haven't performed well. We have noticed over the last 20 days the performance of those kind of extended models that we look out to maybe get an idea of what's going on at the end of September. Their performance is starting to rise again. And that is a phenomenon that we see every year because the weather models, they have a much better handle on what we'll call like the spring, fall, and winter pattern than they do in the summer. Because at least in spring and at least in the autumn months, I believe the technical term here is equinoctial, which for the equinoxes, which landed right in March and September. So during these equinoctial times, we have low pressure systems moving through. We're talking about cold fronts again. That's a new thing we weren't talking about in July and August. And the models have a better handle on those because they're these big atmospheric features that are easily kind of calculated and predicted out into the future, and they can simulate those better. So it's not uncommon to see those performances of the long-range models improve around this time of year. And it does speak to the fact that maybe we should pay a little bit more attention to that dry signal, maybe through the end of September. The only caveat I'll put on that is those same exact models have been calling for a pretty loud signal in the Gulf for one of these homegrown systems to develop maybe at the end of September or early October, where we're not watching one of these tropical waves emanate off Africa, but start to bubble up, kind of, we call them homegrown, right here closer to the continental US. So if one of those develops maybe in the southern Gulf, we call that the Bay of Campeche, it's hard for a system to develop in the Gulf to not hit land. There's very few avenues with which it can get back out to sea without hitting somebody. It's almost never happened. So whether it's Mexico, Texas, the Gulf Coast states, Louisiana, maybe Florida, the west coast of that. If it hits at the right trajectory, recurves up out of the U.S., we're talking about a remnant system coming through Illinois or the Midwest where it can bring rain and wind at a time of year we're not really inviting, rain and gusty winds. So
I'm getting flashbacks in my mind of being out in the field and the wind is just terrible. I think it's happened. It seems like every fall. So add wind into the mix and it's going to be an interesting season. One thing I will say that's making me sad, and this is just what happens, is the sun setting earlier too. I looked out last night and the sun, it said 7:33 sunset, which made me really sad knowing that it's just going to keep setting early and earlier.
Yeah, we're losing, again, we get close to these equinoxes. That is when the kind of curve, we're tilting as fast as we're going to all year. We get back over to the solstices in winter and summer. That's where that kind of starts to flatten out, and then we shift back the other direction.
Yeah.
But during this time in September, I think we're losing like 2.5 minutes of daylight every day. So today that sunset's going to be, a minute and a half sooner than it was yesterday. And that'll just keep on trucking all the way till near the end of December. So winter's on its way. I can't stop it.
We need to end on a higher note.
Yeah.
Matt, anything else? I know this was a quick update, but I appreciate these quick updates just so we know what's going on and what to look forward to. Anything else that should be, no pun intended, on our radar?
Yeah, this isn't on our radar at all. I just put together a report earlier before stepping into this. There's a hurricane we're watching, likely a soon-to-be major hurricane, way over in the central, maybe central eastern Pacific, Hurricane Kiko, which has its eye, unfortunately, on Hawaii, where Kilauea is erupting right now. Fortunately, not causing too many impacts to life or property. But this storm, if it continues to develop the way we think it will, it could pose a threat, maybe as a more remnant, weaker system to Hawaii next week. And that's a pretty rare occurrence, and it is the U.S. So we'll be keeping an eye on that next week if it brings some rain and gusty winds to that state there. And those don't happen too often, and could be a unique atmospheric event.
Just talking about the rainfall, we also think about the Mississippi River. What's going on there, Matt?
Yeah, the Mississippi River levels have been falling again. If I sound like a broken record on this one as well, it's because we've seen repeat scenarios like this decade where the Mississippi River level predictably falls in autumn during these kind of drought years. We're seeing that now. It's at, I think we just entered low stage. We're still well off what we'll call a kind of stalling stage for barge traffic where that starts to get backed up. But if we continue on the same trend that we've seen over the last 30 days, we record another one of these 30 days from now, we'll absolutely be looking at, potential issues to barge traffic. And it just speaks to this sort of interesting 5-year trend in the middle part of the country, kind of right along the Mississippi watershed, where we've had less rainfall over the last 5 autumns. In fact, I think only 23 was maybe the only year where we were close to average or above average. Is that a proper trend that we think is going to continue for the rest of the decade? That's not clear yet, but it does kind of connect a little bit with those warmer sea surface temperatures we've seen in the North Pacific, which have also been lingering for the last 5 years. And given that they're still there, maybe there is something to that we start having to watch for. And the barge traffic is just one symptom of it.
Definitely. Something to keep our eye on. All right. Well, thanks, Matt, for this quick update on the weather, and we'll look forward to more blogs here on fieldadvisor.org. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor podcast. Unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor podcast on your favorite podcast platform.